Assalamu alaikum. This is lecture number 13 of Pakistan Studies. The topic is Towards Independence. In this lecture, we will be covering 7 major developments, and these are: number 1, the Constituent Assembly 1946; 2, civil disobedience movement in the beginning of 1947; 3, the British announcement of February 20th, 1947; 4, Mountbatten's appointment as the last Viceroy of India; 5, the June 3rd Plan; 6, the Indian Independence Act of July 1947; and the last and the 7th is the partition process. Let's take up the first topic, the Constituent Assembly. You would recall that in lecture number 12, we talked about the Cabinet Mission Plan and the setting up of the interim government and the politics around the setting up of the interim government. One of the recommendations of the Cabinet Mission Plan was that a Constituent Assembly will be set up in India. Accordingly, in July 1946, that Constituent Assembly was elected indirectly through the provincial assemblies. And the Muslim League won all but 5 Muslim seats. And once again, it showed that it enjoyed the support of the Muslims of this subcontinent. The first session of the Constituent Assembly was convened on 9th December 1946. The Muslim League boycotted the session. The reason was that the Muslim League demanded 2 constituent assemblies rather than 1 constituent assembly. 2, 1 for India and the second for Pakistan. Therefore, it did not attend the session, and Congress members went there, held the first session in the beginning of 1947. In fact, in January 1947, that Constituent Assembly passed an objective resolution for the Constitution of India, but the Muslim League was out of the Constituent Assembly. In this way, that Constituent Assembly could not really perform the task because the Muslim League wanted a separate Constituent Assembly for Pakistan. Now coming to the developments in 1947, that is civil disobedience movements. If you look at the track record of the Muslim League, you will find that its struggle for the protection and promotion of Muslim rights and then for the establishment of a separate state was essentially constitutional struggle and within the frame of law. However, in 1946, in August 1946, when the Congress Party did not accept all the provisions of the Cabinet Mission Plan, whereas the Muslim League had accepted the Cabinet Mission Plan with reservations, whereas the Congress Party had only said that it would go into the Constituent Assembly but then it is free to frame any type of constitution. And then the question of interim government. Because of that, the Muslim League decided to withdraw its approval of the cabinet mission plan, and then it decided to go to the people to explain its point of view to the common people. So it was for the first time that the Muslim League was officially adopting a policy of mass or popular protest in the streets. And that kind of movement or explanation was made on 16th August 1946, when the Muslim League held meetings, protest marches in different provinces, and unfortunately in Bengal, in Calcutta, those movement and activity resulted in lot of violence as Hindus attacked Muslims, and there were very serious communal riots in Bengal, especially in Calcutta. So this was the first Muslim League effort at the mass level to mobilize common man to its point of view relating to the cabinet mission plan. In 1947, in the beginning of 1947, it launched popular movements at the provincial level. In January and February 1947, it launched agitation, street protests against the Khizr government in that province, that is the province of Punjab. And for about 2 months, Muslim League was holding processions, was holding meetings, was holding protest marches in different parts of Punjab and asking for the resignation of the government of Sir Khizr Hayat Tawana. In view of this popular upsurge, on 2nd March 1947, the Khizr ministry resigned and the governor imposed governor's rule in the province. That is, instead of establishing a new government led by the Muslim League, the governor was directly ruling. This was in the beginning of March 1947. In case of the Northwest Frontier province, their Khudai Khidmatgar, supported by Congress, were ruling the province. In February, the Muslim League started street movement, protest marches, and agitation. And this movement against the frontier government went on until the beginning of June. On June 3rd, when the British government announced the plan for partition of India, this movement was called off. So for a couple of months, there were confrontation between the frontier government and the Muslim League party. In case of Assam, here in Assam, Maulana Bhashani launched a movement for the rights of the Muslim tenants against Hindu landlords. This movement was successful in the sense that all those mistreatments extended to tenants had to be done away with. The impact of these movements, whether in Punjab, NWFP, or by Maulana Bhashani in Assam for Muslim peasants, the Muslim League was able to demonstrate its strength at the popular level, at the common man level, that in the streets it held sway over the mind and thinking of the Muslims. In a way, this was a reassertion of the performance it had made in the 1946 elections. But especially in the Punjab, it was important that League should have demonstrated its strength in the streets, because in Punjab there was a unionist ministry, and the same was the case in the frontier province, where it was a non-Muslim League government or ministry. Now we move on to the third issue, that is the announcement by the British government on February 20th, 1947. This announcement of February 20th, 1947 was a very important announcement, because that announcement showed that the British government would, in due course of time, withdraw from India, and India would become an independent state. Therefore, that's a very significant statement by the British government. This statement was made by Prime Minister Attlee, who declared that his government, and that was a Labour government in London, that his government was working towards self-government in India. And by June 1948, all power in India would be transferred to the representatives. Another point made in this statement was that if no constitution was framed, the British government will have to think whether the powers be given to the provincial governments in some areas, or any other alternative is to be found that is in interest of the people of India. This was an important part of the announcement, that if no single constitution is framed, then the British government will think to whom power should be given in certain provinces in the interest of the people of India. Here, the issue was clear that ultimately India would get independence by June 48, and then the question or possibility of acceptance of Muslim League demand was there, although there was no commitment here. Another part of this announcement was that Lord Mountbatten, who was member of the royal family, royal British family, was appointed the Viceroy. The next part of our lecture is Mountbatten's appointment as Viceroy. Lord Mountbatten was given this assignment through the announcement of February 20th. And he arrived in Delhi on 22nd March 1947 to assume the office of the Viceroy and to become the last Viceroy of India. Soon after coming here, Lord Mountbatten began dialogue with Indian leaders, the Muslim League leaders, the Congress leaders, the Sikh leaders, and others. because the issue had become very serious. That is, if independence is to be granted to India, whether that would be one India, United India, or the Muslim League demand for a separate homeland for Pakistan is to be accepted. And after the developments with reference to the cabinet mission plan, that is to say, after Congress was not willing to accept the groupings of the provinces and the future constitutional formula under the cabinet mission plan, the Muslim League had come to the conclusion that there may not be any option other than Pakistan. Otherwise, they were willing to go for accommodation under the cabinet mission plan in the hope that ultimately Pakistan will be established. After consultation with the Indian leaders, Lord Mountbatten went to England. He consulted the British government and returned to India to present a plan for partition of India, the plan that is described as the June 3rd plan. In fact, this June 3rd plan was shown to the Indian leaders, Muslim League leaders, Congress leaders, others on 2nd of June in the evening, that this is the announcement which Viceroy Mountbatten would make on the 3rd of June. And then, on 3rd, this June 3rd plan was announced, wherein the British gave the idea of partition of India, how that partition was to take place. A framework was given in June 3rd plan. And that is why the June 3rd plan becomes important about independence of India, independence of Pakistan, or what you will call partition of the British India, this subcontinent. What were the significant points of the June 3rd plan? Number one, the British government declared that it will not impose a constitution on India, and the Constituent Assembly will frame a constitution. Another point is that the constitution will not be imposed on the areas that do not accept that constitution. An opinion will be sought from those areas if they want to be part of that constitution or they want to set up a separate constituent assembly. So there would be a separate constituent assembly for the regions, for the provinces that do not want to be part of one constitution. Fourth important point raised in the June 3rd plan was that the provincial assemblies of the Punjab and Bengal would meet in two parts. One part would comprise the members from Muslim majority districts. The second part would include members from the non-Muslim majority provinces. And these two parts would decide separately if they want the province to be partitioned. The next provision was that if any one part of the assembly decides for partition, then the assembly will also decide whether it wants to be part of the new constituent assembly or the one or the old constituent assembly. For the province of Sindh, the June 3rd plan provided that the provincial assembly will meet and decide if it wants to join Pakistan. Situation in the frontier province, northwest frontier province, was somewhat complicated. Here, a non-Muslim League government was functioning, Khudai Khidmatgar government was functioning, which was not supportive of partition of India and establishment of a separate state. However, League, during its civil disobedience movement from onward, had demonstrated that it enjoys support at the popular level. Therefore, the June 3rd plan provided that the future of the frontier province would be decided through referendum. A referendum will be held whether province would opt for India or Pakistan. For Balochistan, it was provided that some appropriate method would be adopted to know the opinion there. I may mention here that Balochistan was not a full province at that time. There was British Balochistan, which was directly run by the British government. Then there were states which were governed by the rulers of those states. For example, Kalat was the biggest state in Balochistan. So it was decided that some method will be evolved and followed to know about the political future of Balochistan. Another provision was that a boundary commission would be appointed for demarcation of boundaries in the Punjab and also in the Bengal area. That is, the boundaries of Punjab and Bengal would be determined by a boundary commission that would be appointed for that purpose. The last significant recommendation or proposal in the June 3rd plan was about the princely states. It said that the princely states will have to decide whether they want to join the new state of Pakistan or India. And while deciding about their future, whether they want to go for India or they want to go for Pakistan, they have to take into account the geographic considerations where they are located and also other factors. And then they have to decide about the political future. So this was the general plan given on June 3rd and whose main points have been highlighted here. We can say that the June 3rd plan was a kind of a decision which the British made about the political future of India, and it envisaged partition. In a way, it was an indirect acceptance of Pakistan, because it left to the assemblies, in case of Punjab, Bengal and Sindh, to decide whether they want to become part of Pakistan or India, and referendum in frontier province and some method for Balochistan. So it was in a way out for the establishment of Pakistan. And earlier, it had very clearly said that it would not impose a constitution, and if provinces want to be out of that constitution, they want to have a separate constitution, they could go ahead and do it. In view of these provisions, the June 3rd plan was generally accepted by the Muslim League. Although it did not meet all the detailed demands which the Muslim League was making, but nevertheless, it accepted their demand for a separate homeland. Therefore, Muslim League accepted it, and Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muslim League, for the first time delivered a speech on All India Radio. Similar facility was extended to Congress leader Pandit Nehru. And it was for the first time that Quaid-e-Azam spoke on the All India Radio, and he concluded his speech with the word Pakistan Zindabad. In other words, this sentence, Pakistan Zindabad, came for the first time on All India Radio. After the June 3rd plan had been announced, and the Indian political parties accepted it, some willingly, some reluctantly. For example, Congress could not accept the partition of India. Congress wanted united India. And here in June 3rd plan, you had a framework to create a separate state for the Muslims. The Congress was very unhappy, and it was with lot of reluctance, with heavy heart, the Congress also accepted the June 3rd plan. But it made no secret of its reservations and its opposition to partition of India. Now, June 3rd plan had to be given a legal shape. If the British wanted to leave India, and then on the basis of June 3rd plan, they had to create a new system, then it was to be given a legal shape. And that legal shape was given to Indian Independence Act, a law that the British Parliament passed. In other words, the British were winding up their rule in India through constitutional and legal means, through peaceful means. And that was done through the Indian Independence Act, which was, as I said earlier, passed by the British Parliament based in London. What were the provisions of the Indian Independence Act? The first and the most important provision of the Indian Independence Act was that on August 15, 1947, two dominions will be established in India. Here, two things are important for our understanding. First, the date for independence of India and Pakistan was given 15th August 1947. If we go back to February 20th announcement, you will find that Lord Attlee had said that there will be self-government in India by June 1948. In other words, the date was advanced from June 1948 to August 15, 1947. And that was being done in July 1947 because this law was passed in July 1947. The second point here is the dominion states or dominion status. This means practically an independent state. The only difference is that in the dominion system, which is British system, British Commonwealth system, the states owe their allegiance to the British Crown. Although the British Crown or the British government or the British Parliament does not and cannot interfere in day-to-day affairs of the state. Therefore, the grant of status of dominion state both to India and Pakistan meant that they will be fully independent and sovereign states. Second important provision of Indian Independence Act was that their legislatures will have all powers to make law for the respective state. That is, Indian legislature for India, Pakistani legislature for Pakistan. The third provision was that the Government of India Act 1935 will be the interim constitution of these states, subject to the changes due to the Indian Independence Act, which was being passed by the British Parliament. Another provision was that the Governor-Generals of the two states can amend the interim constitution until March 31st, 1948, to deal with difficult and emergency situations. Another provision of Indian Independence Act related to the princely states. It said that all arrangements between the princely states and the British government would come to an end when the British rule ends, and these states will be free to enter into agreement with the successor states. And successor states mean India and Pakistan. The last important provision of Indian Independence Act was that the British king will no longer use the title of the Emperor of India. Now, if we look at the provisions of the Indian Independence Act, on the basis of which India and Pakistan came into existence as separate and independent and sovereign states, I may refer back to the reference to Government of India Act 1935. Indian Independence Act declared that the Government of India Act 35 will be the interim constitution of both countries, India and Pakistan, subject to the provisions of Indian Independence Act. You would recall that this Government of India Act 1935 was approved by the British Parliament in 1935, and in 1937 its provincial part was introduced. Its federal part was never introduced in India, but the provincial part was introduced. An important feature of the Government of India Act 1935, as it existed then, was that no Indian legislature, central or provincial, could amend this law. Only the British Parliament had the power to amend the Government of India Act 1935. Once Indian Independence Act of July 1947 was passed, this position changed altogether. From 15th of August 1947, the Indian legislature, that is India's Constituent Assembly, and Pakistani legislature, Pakistani Constituent Assembly, were given right to amend this Government of India Act as they wished. It had also provided that the two Governor-Generals, the Governor-General of India and the Governor-General of Pakistan, they could also bring about some changes in the Government of India Act in order to deal with the situation as it existed then. In other words, the first interim constitution of Pakistan was the Government of India Act 1935 as adopted in Pakistan in the light of Indian Independence Act of 1947. This is also described as the interim constitution of 1947, because from 15th August 1947, this interim constitution became operative. Similarly, the same was the situation in India, where Government of India Act 1935, in the light of the Indian Independence Act of 1947, became independent India's interim constitution. And in both countries, this interim constitution continued to function until they had their own constitutions. Now, we can move to the last section of today's lecture, that is the partition process, or how the June 3rd plan as Indian Independence Act 1947 were actually implemented. That is the partition process, how Indian Independence Act became a reality and two independent states of India and Pakistan came into existence. In the case of Punjab, the Punjab Provincial Legislative Assembly held its session in Lahore and the members from Muslim districts and members from non-Muslim districts met separately. And the non-Muslim members decided for partition of the province of Punjab. Then the Muslim members opted for joining the new Constituent Assembly, which means Pakistan. So Assembly, by its vote, the Muslims decided to opt for Pakistan, and Punjab was partitioned through the decision of the Punjab Assembly. Same procedure applied to the Bengal Assembly. The Muslim majority districts and members from non-Muslim majority districts held their sessions, and the Assembly decided about partition of Bengal, and the Muslim members opted for joining the new Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. In other words, the Bengal Assembly opted for Pakistan. In case of Sindh, the Provincial Assembly, by its vote, opted to become part of Pakistan. In this way, Sindh became part of Pakistan. Northwest Frontier Province. Here, the Indian Independence Act provided for a referendum, and a choice was given whether the voters, the registered voters, wanted to join Pakistan or India. The majority of the voters voted to join Pakistan. A very clear majority of the voters opted to join Pakistan, although the government in the frontier province was not in favor of this proposal. In fact, it decided to boycott the referendum. It decided to boycott the referendum because it knew what would be the result of the referendum. And the Khudai Khidmatgar, the ruling party at that time, wanted a third option to be given, but there was no provision for that. Therefore, referendum brought Northwest Frontier Province into Pakistan. Balochistan. Balochistan, as I have said earlier, was not a full province. So the procedures that were adopted for other provinces could not be adopted there. Whatever system existed, whatever democratic system existed, was used. Number one, the elected members of Quetta Municipal Committee were asked to vote, and they voted overwhelmingly for Pakistan. In addition to this, Shahi Jirga was held, where tribal chiefs participated, and they also opted to join Pakistan. And so far as the states was concerned, they opted for Pakistan later on. For Sylhet district, a referendum was held in Sylhet district, and an overwhelming result from the Sylhet district was to join East Bengal. And East Bengal had already opted to join Pakistan. If you look at this procedure, which I have explained to you, it becomes very clear that different provinces, that opted for Pakistan opted through a democratic process. The democratic process as it existed at that time, the assemblies as they existed at that time, the voters that were registered under law, they participated in referendum. And in case of Balochistan, whatever system existed, participatory system was there, that was used. So Pakistan, in other words, comes into existence through a democratic process, and the democratic institutions as existed there were brought into the process, and only then Pakistan came into existence, which is something commendable, that it was a result of a political struggle and an exercise of the democratic right of the people of the areas that constituted Pakistan. Now let me say a few words about the transfer of power. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah reached Karachi about 1 week before independence, and on 11th August 1947, the first session of the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan was held. And Constituent Assembly of Pakistan comprised representatives from the districts that constituted Pakistan, plus some members were later on brought in to provide representation to states and others who migrated to Pakistan. So the first session was held on 11th August 1947, 3 days before independence. Quaid-e-Azam addressed the session, and he was elected the President of the Constituent Assembly. On 14th August, ceremonies for transfer of power were held. Since Lord Mountbatten was to be there in both ceremonies, in Delhi as well as in Karachi, so the ceremony in Karachi was held on 14th August, and then after that ceremony he flew over to Delhi for independence ceremony there. Although the transfer of power ceremonies were held on 14th August, but Quaid-e-Azam took oath as the Governor General of Pakistan on the morning of August 15th. The first cabinet, led by Liaquat Khan, was also sworn in on August 15th. On the midnight of August 14 and 15, Pakistan came into existence as an independent and sovereign state. But we celebrate Independence Day on 14th because on that day, transfer of power ceremonies were held. This concludes our lecture entitled Towards Pakistan. Khuda Hafiz, until we meet again.